Okay, so let's begin. I just will say a few words as introduction, and also wanted to remind everyone that today is a very important day. I remember this day exactly 61 years ago. Sorry, it's it's not good to admit your age, but today's April 12th. It's the first time that we get men in space, Yuri Gagarin. I remember at the time I was a student at the same university which students are now joining us. And it was an announcement on the internal radio that we should all leave the auditorium and go to the main hall. And in the main hall, it was an announcement that we got first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. And it was a really great emotional thing. This happened 1 year ago. Unfortunately, in our times, I've heard that this name Yuri Gagarin also in some places is no longer welcome. And some of the museums, they no longer display his name. This is the times that we are living in. Okay, dear students, I want to introduce you. We have today 4 like prominent American speakers. Actually, yes. Let me start with our moderator. He's from Montreal, Canada. It's Ehret. I think you already met him earlier. He will be like chairing this session from Montreal. Then we have Raymond McGovern. Ray McGovern is a very prominent American foreign policy analyst working for CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, for Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. And he was in charge of the Soviet desk. It was his job every morning. He was supposed to place on a table of President Reagan and then George Bush Sr. Everything which is dealing with the Soviet Union, but he will probably tell you more about this. And then Anton, Chaitkin. Anton is prominent expert, author of many books, and I just recently learned that he was running for mayor of New York. Maybe he'll tell you more about this. So let's begin. Our first speaker today, actually he's online. He's a professor of the University of Illinois, John Marshmeyer, and he will get a short opinion about what's going on, of course, in Ukraine. And then we will follow with Ray McGovern and Anton and Matt. Okay, so Matt, please start this John Marshmeyer video.
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. And I recall our travels in Germany fondly, especially when Steve and I debated the Ukraine issue back then. I agree with what you said, by the way, Katrina, when you said that this is the most dangerous crisis since the Second World War. I think it's actually more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is not to minimize the danger of that crisis. But I think basically what we have here is a war between the United States and Russia.
The video is too low on the volume, period.
And their future. I think there's a very dangerous chance of escalation. First of all, escalation to where the United States is actually doing the fighting against Russia. The two sides are clashing militarily, which hasn't happened so far. And I think there's a serious danger of nuclear escalation here. I'm not saying that it's likely, but I can tell stories on how it actually happens. So the question is, how did we get into this mess? So what caused it? And the reason it's very important to deal with.
Matt, we have problems with sound, I think.
But I think basically what we have.
So there was zero, no one could hear anything, or it was just very low?
Low.
It was
Very
low.
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 And that's as loud as I could make that YouTube video, unfortunately. I've not encountered this problem before.
Well, I think in this case, we simply will go to Ray, because Ray heard the speech. I know. So Ray, please help us, because, you know, just sometimes you have these technical things. So Ray, please go ahead. Take it from there.
Sure. Thank you for having me. And excuse me for speaking in English. За последнее время у меня никакой практики с русским языком. Это жаль. So I will speak in English, and I will try to pick up where Professor Mearsheimer left off. What he described was how you ascribe guilt, or how you describe responsibility for the terrible situation now existing in Ukraine. And Professor Mearsheimer, and I agree, that it goes back to at least 2008, when Professor Mearsheimer points out that NATO, at a summit of NATO leaders in Bucharest, actually it was April the 3rd, 2008, decided in their wisdom, in a formal declaration, that Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. Whoa. Now, had the Russians been warned about this? Indeed, they had. Just 2 months before, on the 1st of February, 2008, our ambassador, that is the US ambassador in Kiev, in Moscow, was called into the foreign ministry. There was a young foreign minister, newly appointed, named Sergei Lavrov. As you know, he's still foreign minister. He said, Mr. Burns, the name of our ambassador was William Burns. Mr. Burns, do you know what "niet" means? And Burns, well, I think so. Well, Lavrov said, "Niet" means "niet." If you allow Ukraine, Georgia also, to become members of NATO, we will have to decide whether we have to intervene, his words, Lavrov's word, whether we have to intervene in Ukraine, and whether there will be a civil war, which is probable. So please, take account of our strategic interests. Do not admit Ukraine to NATO. Now, to his credit, our ambassador, William Burns, who now, by the way, is head of the CIA, reported that back factually to his superior, who happened to be Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State. And he pointed out in his own comments, you know, Russia has its own strategic concerns, and we need to take that into account. Well, Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, vice president at the time, George Bush, and subsequent presidents didn't think they had to take that seriously. And so we're talking about February 1st, right? April 3rd, NATO declares Ukraine will be part of NATO. So it started really there. And then the next benchmark, which is not known very much in US media, is the event in Kiev on the 22nd of February, 2014. Now, our press, up until including today, denies that there was a coup orchestrated by the West on February 22nd, 2014, okay? Now, they deny that, and they consider it a conspiracy theory. And yet we have a recorded conversation between the coup plotters in the person of Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary of State at the time, and the ambassador that we had, that is US had in Kiev, his name was Jeffrey Pyatt, and they're conspiring. They're naming the next prime minister. Now, how did I know that? Well, that was revealed on YouTube. Revealed on YouTube. The intercepted conversation was played on YouTube on the 4th of February, 2014. Whoa! But you said, McGovern, that the coup was on the 22nd. How could that be? Well, I thought that as soon as the coup was exposed, well, poor Yatsenyuk, the new, the designated by the US new prime minister, he'll never become prime minister. There'll never be a coup. It's blown. In intelligence terms, we say it's blown, okay? Well, 18 days later, it happened. Where was Mr. Putin? President Putin was in Sochi, finishing up the Olympics. He came back the next day, and that's when he convened his advisors and said, what do we do about this? Crimea was annexed, and it was decided to help those people, those so-called separatists, but really regionalists in eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Lugansk, to the degree Russia could do that in a quiet way. Now, why is it that Americans don't know that? Well, it has to do with the media. Ed Lozansky has asked me to mention just a word about what I call the MICIMATT, which has been endorsed by lots of folks, everyone from the late Stephen Cohen to Ed Lozansky to Pepe Escobar, okay? It means, and if you have a pencil, it means MICIMATT. It reminds, it sort of rhymes with Mickey Mouse, so you can remember it. M, so military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank, complex. Now, that's much broader and much more powerful than the MIC, the military industrial complex that our President Eisenhower warned about the day he left office. Why is that important? It's important because Eisenhower said this is a real danger to our democracy, and the only way to prevent it, the only way to, as an antidote to it, is a well-informed citizenry. Now that's why I said media, the MICIMATT. The middle M is media. It needs to be in all caps, so to speak, because without the media, the MICIMATT doesn't work. What am I saying here? I'm saying that Americans don't know anything that John Mearsheimer has said, that I have said. It's suppressed in the media to the point where people are criticized as conspiracy theorists for telling the real story. So when President Putin went on TV in early September 2013, just as President Obama was arriving in St. Petersburg for the economic summit, when he did that, he said, look, you know, your Secretary of State, his name was Kerry, on врет, он знает, что врет, это печально. You don't need to translate that. God, I'd never seen a president call a rival Secretary of State a downright liar, but he had lots of evidence. Kerry had just told Congress the moderate rebels were winning in Syria, and that there had been a chemical attack outside Damascus. Those were lies, and Putin called them lies. Obama didn't object too much because Putin, as we say in English, he pulled Obama's coals out of the fire because he gave him a way to avoid war, open war against Syria, namely the destruction of Syrian chemical weapons under UN supervision on a US warship specifically outrigged, specifically prepared to destroy such weapons. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that there's a lot of lying going on, and people in America only know what the mainstream media is telling them. And so what Eisenhower warned about has come to fruition. Americans are deprived of the real story in this respect. How about Russians? Well, you know, I used to evaluate Russian propaganda, and it was pretty bad in the Soviet days. Matter of fact, I remember reading Pravda, as we had to do every day. I say, whoa, what is this word? Volstritskie kravopitsi. Wall Street bloodsuckers. And I would say, oh, that's over the top. There aren't any Wall Street bloodsuckers. Now, that was 5 decades ago. Everybody, including intelligence analysts of foreign affairs, learn things as they go along. And if you look what happened in 2008, 2009, well, you know that was the very definition of Volstritskie kravopitsi. So I no longer look to Russian media as completely distorted. As a matter of fact, there are kernels of truth there that are more persuasive than what you see on BSNBC, Fox News, or the other outlets. What's my bottom line here? The situation in Ukraine is really, really dangerous. Professor Mearsheimer was just about to say the prospect of a nuclear exchange is possible now. He says it's not probable, but the very fact that people will be referring to this, President Putin included, is really a stage up on this notch of belligerence. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to get the truth out. We need to be able to educate not only our American citizens, but Russian citizens, what's at stake here. Now, I thought that Mr. Putin would be able to achieve his ends with respect to Ukraine without invading Ukraine. I think it was a terrible thing that there's a war now in Ukraine. What I don't agree with in terms of what the US media says is that it was unprovoked. If anything were provoked, that was provoked. Again, it's not a good idea to violate international borders, but even the Chinese, and I think this is important to mention, even the Chinese have sort of made an exception for what President Putin did. You know, they have this bedrock principled stand about non-interference in the affairs of other countries. That is China's position from 100,000 years ago, okay, all right? Well, what happened? When Mr. Putin and the Soviet forces invaded Ukraine, the Chinese said, well, we can understand that. We appreciate Russian concerns with respect to NATO encroachment. We know that they have a strategic concern here. And so China not only avoided calling it an invasion, not only abstained at the UN, but is giving full propaganda support to propaganda, full public support, not only in their official statements, but in their very active common media, the internet. Now, what's important here? It's important to know that Mr. Putin feels that he and Mr. Xi of China, Xi Jinping, the president of China, have an alliance now where they are supporting each other. It's important for Americans to know that all this drivel in our media about Russia being isolated is precisely that, garbage, drivel. When you have Xi Jinping, president of 1.4 billion people in China, when you have India wavering and not supporting the US, that's another billion. When you have most of the third world really wondering what's going on here, that's not isolated Russia. That encourages Russia to finish the job now And I understand as of this morning, there's really strong fighting in the east part of Ukraine. What do we do about this? Well, in addition to spreading truth around, we have to pretty much recognize what the stakes are. We have to sort of much realize that this concept that America is an indispensable or exceptional nation is rubbish. It may have been true way back after World War II. And just as an aside here, I would mention that there was a time back in World War II, and I was alive during the whole war, okay, where Russia and the United States were combined in an alliance that defeated the Nazis, okay? Why is that important? Because Russia, as you know better than I, lost 26 million people in that war, 26 million at the hands of the Nazis. Now, Professor Lozansky mentioned that we have a very important Yuri Gagarin Day today. In just 2 weeks, we will have the anniversary, the 77th anniversary, if my arithmetic is correct, of the meeting on the Elbe, the Встреча на Elbe, okay? Now, why have we forgotten that Russia and the United States have no real impenetrable differences? Because of the MICIMATT. You can't have a non-tense relationship with Russia if you want to sell arms, if you want to make arms, if you want to sell them, if you want to get a lot of profiteering, give them to Congress people, they'll appropriate more money, or make more. Hello, it's a circle that is really insidious. So the MICIMATT rules this, and what we need to do is disabuse Americans and everybody else that we are exceptional. It's high time we realize that we are not, rather than Russia being isolated, we and the so-called white West are standing alone against most of the population of the world. So when Mr. Putin warned in a New York Times op-ed, just as he was helping Obama avoid war in Syria, he warned that, you know, he said the trust that has grown between our countries. This is President Putin writing an op-ed in the New York Times. The date was September 11, 2013. September 11th is just a coincidence, okay? What Mr. Putin said is, I trust and I treasure the increasing trust that now exists between not only our countries, but between Mr. Obama and me personally. The only thing I disagree with is the notion that some countries are exceptional. I believe that when God created all these countries, he made them equal. Some are closer to democracy, some others are not. But when God looks down at these countries, he sees them as all equal. Whoa. Now, he finished up that op-ed by saying that. And later, about 2 years ago, he said that in an interview. So I believe the report that was given to me at the time that he penned that last paragraph himself. Now, what Americans need to do is disabuse themselves of the fact that we're exceptional and therefore entitled to do a lot of things that others are not entitled to do. Last thing I'll say is this, that there is no contact that I know of now between our two top military officers. The latest reports are that General Milley, the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Austin, or Lloyd Austin, who's the Secretary of Defense, are having to leave voicemails with their opposite numbers in Russia. That's crazy. That's really crazy. Even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had high-level contacts, and that's one reason we were able to get out of it without destroying the world. Last thing I'll say is, as you would have heard John Mearsheimer say, this current situation with respect to Ukraine is more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis. More dangerous. Whoa, that's saying a lot. And so if it's more dangerous, we need, at the very least, more sensible people in top places, and we need Russians as well as US people to be open to some sort of dialogue to prevent the worst from happening. Because as Mearsheimer has said most recently, it's a situation where Russia has to win. I mean, this is Russia's backyard. What Mr. Putin has started now is something that he cannot lose. Conversely, with Mr. Biden, he cannot lose either. He is facing domestic problems that problems galore. Inflation is just one of them, okay? So you have a situation where both teams, both countries have to win. That, Professor Mearsheimer points out, is not possible. And so what needs to happen is to end this thing in Ukraine as soon as possible, and then get together and work out a new arrangement for post-World War II Europe, which recognizes that, as Ambassador Burns said way back in 2008, Russia has its own national security concerns, specifically with respect to its near abroad, and that unless we take those into account, things like what just happened are going to happen. I'll stop there. I probably talked longer than I intended, but I'd be happy, and I really look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ray. It's a very good statement, and good that you mentioned John. It's too bad that we couldn't hear all his speech, but I will send students this link. Perhaps they'll can do it. But I want to correct you on one thing. You mentioned that problem started in 2008 or 7, right? There's this Bucharest summit about Ukraine and Georgia join NATO. I believe this problem started much earlier. Actually, it started almost immediately after the collapse of USSR in 1991. I know this from my personal experience, because at the time we were all naive and thinking that after collapse of communism, which we thought it would be like a major problem between United States and Russia, now that Russia is free, and actually Ukraine is free, then we can all live in peace and happiness, and it'll be like a new era of love, peace and love. And what we did is brought, as NGO, as non-government organization, we brought large delegation from Ukraine, from Ukrainian parliament called Rada, and from the Russian parliament, Duma. Each delegation had about maybe 20 people. A Ukrainian delegation was headed by chairman of the committee called Foreign and Military. It was a combined committee, which was in charge of foreign policy and defense, Vladimir Mukhin. And a Russian team also was, I forgot the name of the guy who was head of the delegation, but still was a very powerful member. So we were sitting in Congress, the United States Congress, and chairman of the meeting was Congressman Tom Lantos. So he was chairing this, and we had speakers. One of the speakers, maybe guy you know very well, maybe he was your boss, James Woolsey. Did you work under James Woolsey?
I did not. No, I was happy to have missed that opportunity. I retired just before he came in.
I see. Okay, but James Woolsey spoke to us, you see, and the people from Pentagon. And the theme was how now when the two countries are free and want to really be friends with the United States, and friends, of course, among each other, because Russia and Ukraine are so close to each other. How the United States can help to build this new world, new security architecture, and as I said, peace and freedom. So all the speakers were saying, yes, this is a great idea. At the end, we had a reception at the Ukrainian embassy in Washington. We had a reception, and they were singing and drinking, and it was almost like El Brewer, all El Brewer 2.0. It was all in Georgetown, Ukrainian embassy in Washington, D.C. So then people left, Russians went to Moscow and Ukrainians to Kiev, and then something else happened. People who you call MICIMATT, they didn't like what we were discussing. They didn't have any intention to have Russia and Ukraine be friends, and friends also of the United States. They had different idea. Different idea was explained by people like Robert Kagan, by Wolfowitz, and they were talking about unipolar world now, where the United States is the leader on top, and all others have to say, yes, sir. This is what happened. So it's simply a correction in timing. The decision was made during the Clinton administration, and then all our hopes that they were all kind of, and what we see now results is of this policy and what we see today. Yes, Ray, you want to follow up? Mm-hmm.
No, I just want to say, Ed, can you hear me? You can?
Yes.
Okay, that you're absolutely right. It was Clinton who reversed George H.W. Bush's promise not to move NATO 1 inch eastward of a reunited Germany. Now, your students will know how many Russians perished under the Nazis in World War II. They will know what a terrific concession it was by Gorbachev and Shevardnadze to say, okay, we can have a reunited Germany on the condition that you don't move NATO any farther to the east. And we did under Clinton. And before you know it, there are 14, count them, 14 new nations in NATO. So it did start back then. What I was referring to is how John Mearsheimer delimits it to a more proximate time, specifically with respect to Ukraine's application to join NATO. And that was the 2008 thing. And the contrast could not have been more stark. We were warned, that is, we were warned, niet means niet, right? That was February 1st. We have the Moscow cable. If I've seen one cable from Embassy Moscow, I've seen about 10,000, okay? And we have that courtesy, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks. It hasn't been denied in any way. So we have that cable, and then just 2 months and 2 days later, NATO says, the heck with you, Russia. We're going to include, or as they put it in their declaration, Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. That's when things really started to hit the fan, as we say, and that's why John Mearsheimer starts there. You're quite right, Professor Lozansky. It starts much earlier than that.
Thank you, Ray. By the way, you mentioned Julian Assange, and yesterday I was driving by British Embassy in Washington, and there were large demonstration with posters demanding from Brits to release Julian Assange. So this is something talking about freedom and values. This is when journalists are now in prison, and he's facing, actually, if he's extradited, he faces death sentence in the United States.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, now, Anton, I know that you want to say something about also some historical things when not only El Brewer, but even earlier when Russia and United States were on the positive side. Go ahead, Anton.
Well, I want to give a different overview, perhaps, that maybe the students haven't heard before about the problem that we're facing. this is a short statement, and then we can get into some more history. America is pushing for war, attacking Russia and China. What would change America? Many Americans go along with these bad policies while people are stunned and confused. President Biden is not very popular, but things got really bad all of a sudden. Hate propaganda, censorship, surveillance. To confuse people, our rulers create fake activism about sex identities, for example, instead of activism for real civil rights or economic rights or against war. Those who might speak out for change don't know what to say to their fellow Americans to make them act for real change. America's government at the moment won't listen to criticism. So what should foreigners say to America's people that would convince them to challenge their government? I'm going to tell you what needs to be said, and I make this personal challenge to you students. Act on this message, spread this message to others. The most important fact about the world today is that a faction of imperialists took hold of America and changed it in a horrible way. They took away what used to make America good for its own people and good for the world. You will see in my history book called Who We Are that our greatest past leaders always fought against this imperial faction. Presidents George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, and John Kennedy moved America forward so that we had more power to control nature, not to control people. Their program gave us skilled industries with high wages and electricity, and the space program, not starting wars. They made America strong, and they thought all countries ought to be strong and independent. In most of America's history, Russia and America were good friends. Who were the imperialists that always tried to stop America's progress and block its positive influence? Financiers in London and New York, and their clients, the slave owners. When I was about your age, 3 American leaders were assassinated one after another: President Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and the president's brother, Robert Kennedy. The imperial faction then pushed us into Vietnam and other wars. They introduced street drugs, an ugly culture that made people stupider. They moved our good industries out of America into weak countries that had to pay lower wages. The new system that replaced the historic American system we now call globalism. The globalists are the faction that grabbed America and changed it for the worse. When communism ended in Russia, these globalists did not bring Russia into the old friendship with America, because these men had already crushed the old America, and they wanted to crush any other country that tried to do what America did, that tried to help its own people with good living standards and national greatness. America has been robbed of its power to do good to its own people and to the world. Without doing good, you are not fully human. America can be changed only if Americans begin to demand that what was taken from them be restored. The terrible change in the USA must be reversed. All nations share the same basic interests: peace, and the scientific power to improve our lives. But our world is in terrible danger now because a selfish faction is willing to risk destroying civilization to keep their power. They are pushing us toward world war. So, what do Americans need to be told? Say to them, you were a free and creative country, a prosperous country, and a great blessing to the world. You can be that again if you have the courage to demand your country back from this insanely selfish faction that is threatening all of our lives. So I say to you students, you need courage to hate the sin, but love the sinner. And only love can change the world for the better.
Thank you, Anton. Okay, great message. Let's turn now to Canada. Maybe, Matt, what's Canadians thinking?
I don't know if Canadians are thinking too much these days, but I know that if they were to listen to you gentlemen speaking, that would definitely awaken something. And I think that what both of you said was brilliant. I don't have too much more to add except to say that, Anton, what you just pointed out is very, I think, important. Canadians have a deep-seated anti-Americanism. By virtue of being Canadian, it's built into us. That's also being part of the British Empire. We've never had a war of independence. We've never fought for much. And so there's been generations of enforcing this idea that what makes us great is that we're not American, even though we sound American, we look American. And I was taught this, and it's embedded in our schools. It's embedded in our psyche, and it's very strong. The important thing, the way that this is sold to us is we're only shown the worst side of America. We're shown imagery of slavery. We're shown imagery of hypocrisy. We're shown imagery of wars, of Vietnam, right? Civil rights abuses in the 60s. These images are just flashed in our heads. And we're not really permitted to appreciate that better forgotten tradition, which really gave birth to the greatest upshifts in civilization that were instigated by the ideas of the American Revolution, and that allowed for slavery to be extinguished, and that allowed for people like Martin Luther King to arise and to try to reawaken common sense and morality in the American population more broadly. And as you inferred, Anton, this has been something which even Americans have been induced to forget how this happened. They've forgotten who they were in many ways, which is why I think you chose the title of your book as you did. And if you're going to be able to, I know as a teacher, if you're going to be able to speak and teach a student well, the best teachers that I ever had were the ones who treated me like I had a soul, like there was something already in me, even though I was ignorant, that they were able to awaken as a hunger that would be something that would make me want to make more discoveries on my own. The ones who were just talking at me or trying to modify my behavior by reward and punishment were not the ones that I really remember or cherish much. So I think it's like that if you're talking to anybody, if you're going to rehabilitate a drug addict, somebody who was once a good person, they made bad choices, and they've built up, what you might call sin. They've made, they've gone into a world of crime. If you're going to successfully rehabilitate, your mindset has to be somebody who could see that, okay, this person is ultimately, you have to talk to their better self and awaken that and constantly go there. So America today, one might think they're doomed. Financially, it's a bubble that's ready to collapse. They've been taken over by a parasite, which, I mean, I was just, the connection between what happened in the 90s and today. Victoria Nuland, I was just surprised to discover recently that she was the personal assistant to Strobe Talbott. Strobe Talbott, who was the guy who, the Rhodes Scholar in charge of managing much of the deconstruction of Russia in the 1990s, alongside other people that he was interfacing with, like Soros, like, Chubai, may he never come back to Russia, and other traitors. I mean, Victoria Nuland was right there on the inside, where these people were devotedly obsessed, almost religiously, to the idea of a new one world order, of an age which would not have nation states, which would not have traditions, morality, things like that, that would be more manageable. These are really perverse individuals who don't think that human beings have a soul, that we are capable of sovereignty. They think that actually if you give people the ability to use their minds in connection with their conscience, like all mature human beings have that potential. If you do that, it will create too much disequilibrium, too much unmanageability in the system. And these are people obsessed kind of like, you know, with the idea that human beings are like a computer model, that you could just manage our population. You can manage everything the way you can, the equilibrium of a mathematical equation in a computer. The idea of a new discovery that you tend to get with things like the space program, where there's a lot of discoveries that happen, which transform that can feed back into the productive processes. That is disturbing. That's not something that they like, because you can only control that which you already monopolize. If a new discovery comes in that renders, let's say, you know, let's say we have nuclear fusion. Somebody discovers how to utilize the atom in such a way that we can actualize nuclear fusion at some point. What happens to your multinational corporations that have monopolized the oil market, right? What happens to all of the other forms of power structures that had embedded themselves in a system of dependency of the old system? Well, they lose their power. They don't like that. Then they have to adapt and try to reconquer the new thing. That's a lot of work. They would rather just control the diminishing rate of returns. So the thing that people like Yuri Gagarin were representing, like John F. Kennedy was representing when he was calling for a US-Russia space program together in 1963, a few weeks before he was murdered, he openly called at the United Nations for a US-Russia joint space program. You can listen to the speech online. It's beautiful. To literally create a new outlook that would escape the shackles of the Cold War, of each against all, and say, okay, no, there's a higher system beyond the Earth, in the universe, that we're all made in the image of, that we can all discover together, and that can create win-win. More, we don't have to just get wealth by extracting or stealing it. We can get wealth by creating systems where it's in everybody's benefit. So then back to what, you know, Ray was saying, and John Mearsheimer, I would just say, you know, it's true. Like, Putin cannot win. Putin cannot, forget what I just said there. Putin cannot lose. Russia cannot lose. The United States, Biden also is of the view they cannot lose. It's true. But if you look at what Russia and China are activating right now in terms of a paradigm of win-win cooperation, it is in everybody's benefit, rich, poor alike, of different job markets from China, India, Russia, Pakistan, Iran. Everybody who's participating in what's being brought into the world right now benefits financially. You make a lot of money by building big infrastructure, by building science. Putin reemphasized the priority of going back, having a broad space program for the moon. China and Russia are going to co-construct a lunar base by the end of the decade, they say. There's mining potentials, other things that will involve new discoveries, lots of new discoveries along the way, in the atom as well as in macrocosm, and in, you know, all sorts of things. If we do that, if the US and Western powers realize that it's in our advantage to also participate, we're going to make, even on a lower level, a lot of money. Like, if people think on that low level, they will make a lot of money. But on a higher level, we are going to become more in harmony with what we once were, I think, as far as a species that was made not to self-destruct. Because the other thing is, maybe we're a mistake. You could entertain that other hypothesis if you want, philosophically. Maybe we were just a mistake in the universe, and, you know, other species don't willfully self-destruct, but human beings seem to have that power. Maybe that's our destiny. If that's true, that's pathetic and that's depressing. But certainly it's possible that we can deploy nuclear weapons and exterminate ourselves. But is that really what we are? Or are we destined for something better? Maybe do we have this better thing inside of us, you know? And I think that I would just end there. We have these different paradigms.
Well, students have to make a decision. They're entering this professional life. They are now, it's one of the most prestigious universities. By the way, you mentioned fusion, and as it happens, now, despite all this, what's going on, and hatred, and Russian, like, famous singers and poets and composers are now deprived of the scene and all that, still scientists who are working on the fusion. There's French, this tokamak system, which actually was invented in Russia in the Kurchatov Institute of Atomic Energy. And the new president of this university, which students are listening to, he was working for this project. He was, I think, in the leadership of Kurchatov. So I'm pleased that I also did some work in this field. So maybe this is something that we have to get attention to tell that despite all this craziness, scientists from Russia, United States, and European countries still working on this tokamak idea. Well, we live in a very dangerous time, and things can go either way. Either they go the way that we propose here, win-win, or what this MICIMATT was actually absolutely crazy idea of running the world, to be in unipolar world, which it can happen, and it can lead us to World War III. But if students might have some ideas, maybe what we just say inspires them to be more active and come up with their own vision. Just want to mention, we already talked about April 25 coming up, and I want to invite everyone. We'll have another conference like this exactly on April 25, and we call it the Elba Spirit. This is a spirit which helped two countries to join as allies and to fight a common enemy. As a matter of fact, we're talking about Nazis whom we won in 1945, but this Azov battalion, which is now the most probably powerful force in Ukrainian army, they openly declare their pro-Nazi views, and they have the same symbolics, and not on symbolics, just language. Nevertheless, despite congressional resolution prohibiting US government to finance groups like that, it's going on anyway. And for 8 years, some of those Azov and other neo-Nazi battalions, they were trained and financed and equipped with weapons in NATO countries. So this is really, really horrible. Well, yeah, I see Ray wants to add something. So before Ray, yes, you'll do it just to finish April 25. We will start like 9 o'clock Washington time, and it will be 4 o'clock 16 in Moscow, and we will be joined by people from around the world. We already have participants from Asian countries, from China, from India, from Latin America. It really will be like a flash mob, and not, of course, we will not have long speeches. We ask everyone simply to show the flag, say a few words, 1 minute, and then we have what we call international, huge, worldwide flash mob for the Elba spirit and for peace, and love, of course. Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that on April 25th, a couple of years ago, on the 75th anniversary of the meeting on the Elbe, I was happy to be invited to Moscow. I was able to speak, recited a poem from Nekrasov, and then a Russian general, a Soviet general, came up to me and he looked at me and he said, "Studebaker, Studebaker, Studebaker." Now, what that was all about was the United States gutted the Studebaker car factories in Detroit and elsewhere and made trucks and tanks and so forth to give to Russia so that they could help Russia face the Nazis in Volgograd and so forth. So, you know, there's a reservoir of goodwill in Russia for its whole ally. And my question would be, Can that persist? Can that still live in current circumstances? If people can, in the younger generation, can identify with that, then we have some hope. If they don't know much about that, if they don't know Studebaker, then it's much more difficult to identify with their American co-citizens who are very now malnourished on knowledge, but really have a basic goodness to them that should be able to prevent the worst. That's all I wanted to say.
By the way, we mentioned space program today, and one of the people who was at this ceremony was Alexei Leonov, famous Russian cosmonaut, and he was shaking hands with General Bruce McClinton, who was military attaché at the American embassy in Moscow. And so this it's amazing. And it was such a great emotional scene when Americans and Russians again repeated what happened in 1945 by embracing each other. Of course, there was some also wine and maybe vodka too, drinking. I composed, I'm not, of course, not a composer, but I composed a tune, and I used different videos for this tune, and I made new video with Elbe River. By the way, your picture is there as well, and also Leonov and Bruce McClinton and others. And so I will send you this video, which is dedicated to Elbe River, which we're going to show also on April 25. Well, I think it was a pretty good conference. I don't know if any students want to say something or I ask any questions. We have a few minutes left. Please go ahead. Any thoughts, any ideas? No, well, students are shy, although I keep encouraging them all to be more like open and, anyway. No, well,
there's a lot to process in a lot of this, a lot of mind food to chew on.
Sometimes
I think Anton has one last thought about maybe, was it FDR perhaps?
Yeah. Yeah. Today is the anniversary of the death of Franklin Roosevelt, April 12th. Now, this man, as president, built great dams in America, out west, particularly, and in the Tennessee Valley. And one of the men who built them was named Edgar Kaiser, great engineer. He also built the Liberty ships that brought supplies across the Atlantic. And one of them was the Novorossiysk that went to Russia to help supply the Russians who were fighting for us valiantly during World War II. Later on, President Kennedy made an agreement with the country of Ghana to build a great dam there, to help them build the dam for Kwame Nkrumah. And this same Edgar Kaiser from Roosevelt's time went to Ghana and was the engineer for this great dam. This is the time when Kennedy was trying to revive Roosevelt's whole program. And I believe that Kennedy was killed by the faction that betrayed Roosevelt's whole program, the imperial faction in the CIA and the Pentagon. And these are the people that are now ruling on behalf of this MICIMATT. These are the people that killed our president, who was doing some good for the world. This is a tradition that was most pronounced by Roosevelt, and then Kennedy tried to do the same thing. So that's our world that we have to strive to get back to.
Okay, well, thank you. I think it was a very good meeting, and hope to see you all on April 25. Thank you, Ray, Anton, Matt, the students, and please be more active. I keep sending you some articles. Please send your comments. By the way, Ray, I sent them your recent article in the anti-war, and any comments that they will send to me, I will forward them to you. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Everyone.